This video is from section 4.4. It's the first in a series of videos on factoring, and we're going to look today at how do we factor out a GCF, a greatest common factor. So here's our first problem asking us to factor 2x minus 6. What I'm going to do is look at both terms. I have two terms right here, the 2x and the minus 6. And what I'm trying to figure out is what is the largest number that I could divide into the 2 and the 6 evenly. So the largest factor of 2 and 6, that's what we call it the GCF, right, greatest common factor, is 2. So I'm going to take the 2 and put that on the outside. So I always put my GCF out here, and then in my parentheses I'm going to write down what is left over. What's left over when I divide a 2 out of each of those terms? So if I divide a 2 out of the first term, the only thing that's left is x. And if I divide a 2 out of the second term, what's left is a 3. And so my final answer here is 2 times x minus 3. This is what we call factoring. Now the nice part is you can always check to see whether you did this right by going backwards. Multiply this out. Does 2x times 2 times x equal 2x? Sure does. Does 2 times negative 3 equal negative 6? Sure does. So this is going to be my final answer here. Now the next problem, we have x squared plus 3x. Now this time we don't have a number that each term has in common, but they do each have an x in it. So this time our GCF, or our greatest common factor, is just going to be x. So x is the greatest common factor on the outside. And on the inside I write out what is left when I divide that x out. So if I take an x out of the first term, I'd have just an x left. If I take a x out of the second term, I'd have a 3 left. And so that's what we call the factored form right here. And again, if you want to check this out, make sure you're right, just go backwards. X times x is x squared. X times 3 is 3x. In this next one, again, I've got no number they have in common, but they do have an x in common. They both have an x in there, so let's take an x out of each one. That goes on the outside. If I take an x out of the first term, I have x left. X out of the second term, I have 10 left. And let's just check it. X times x is x squared. X times negative 10 is negative 10x. So x times x minus 10. All right, now we're going to get a little more complicated here. This time my GCF, it's not just a number, and it's not just a variable, it's a combination. Both terms have an x in it, like the previous example, and they both have a number factor in common. So 3 is the biggest factor of 3 and 12. So we're going to take out not just a number, but a number and a variable. So this time the GCF is going to be 3 and x. That's my GCF. On the inside, if I divide that away or take it out, I have x left over on the first term. In the second term, I'm going to have just a 4 left over. Again, to check that, let's go backwards. 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times 4 is 12x. So that's my factored form. This problem, same idea, but now we threw a decimal in there. That's okay. So let's look at taking out the 0.5 and the x. So 0.5x is my GCF here. And if I divide that out of the first term, I have an x left. And the second one, you gotta be a little careful here. If I divide 9 by 0.5, I get 18. So again, let's just check that and make sure we did it right. So 0.5x times x is 0.5x squared. And 0.5x times 18 is 9x. So that is our factor there. And one last problem, this time, again, just a little different. They not only both have an x in common, but both terms right now, both these two terms here, have an x squared in common. They both have at least 2 x's. So this time my GCF is not just x, it's x squared, because there's at least 2 x's in each one. Again, remember that x cubed means x times x times x. And then x squared is x times x. So both those terms have 2 x's in, so I'm putting x squared as my GCF on the outside. Then what's left over? We're going to have an x left over here in the first term. And the second term, what's left is 9. And again, just double check that, just go backwards. X squared times x is x cubed. X squared times 9 is 9x squared. And that concludes this short video on factoring by taking out a GCF.